In the dark days of December 1941, there was no good news for the American people. The Japanese had sunk 18 ships and killed or wounded over 3,000 people in the attack on Pearl Harbor. They had captured Guam and Wake Island. They had captured Hong Kong, and they had invaded the Philippines. Allied defenses were crumbling. Something was needed to turn the tide. Speaking with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, President Roosevelt expressed a desire to strike back at the Japanese as soon as possible to strengthen American morale at home, and in January of 1942, he was presented with a plan. The idea was to launch a strike using medium bombers flying one way from an aircraft carrier to bomb Japan and land in China. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle was selected to lead the mission. The only aircraft that could fulfill the mission requirements was the North American B-25 Mitchell, with a wingspan short enough to operate from the carrier and a bomb load large enough to cause damage. It was the only choice. But it was a new aircraft, and there was only one unit that was experienced with the plane, the 17th Bomb Group. Rushed to the West Coast after Pearl Harbor to defend the mainland, the 17th Bomb Group was stationed at Pendleton, Oregon, and was engaged in anti-submarine patrols off the coast. They even had their first combat experience with the B-25 when they sank a Japanese submarine off the mouth of the Columbia River. Training at Pendleton until February, the group moved to South Carolina, where the volunteer crews were schooled in carrier takeoffs and overwater navigation. They were then sent to Oakland, California, where the 16 B-25s were loaded aboard the USS Hornet for the trip to Japan. On the morning of April 18, 1942, all 16 B-25s succeeded in taking off from the carrier and headed to industrial targets in Japan. After the attack, they headed for China, but because they had launched early to avoid detection, the aircraft ran out of fuel and the crews bailed out over eastern China. One crew was interned in the Soviet Union. 2 other crews were captured by the Japanese, but the rest made it into the hands of friendly Chinese forces, who returned them to the U.S. For that, the Chinese would pay dearly, as the Japanese killed thousands of Chinese in retribution. Although the damage was small, the Doolittle raid was a success. It raised American morale and proved to the Japanese that they were not invulnerable to attack by the air. It also caused the Japanese High Command to gamble on attacking the U.S. base at Midway, which was to cost them the war. In addition to training at Pendleton, the Doolittle raiders had another significant tie to Oregon, as 5 of the crewmen who took part in the raid were natives of Oregon. Everett Holstrom, the pilot of the No. 4 aircraft, was born in Cottage Grove, and David Jones, the pilot of No. 5 aircraft, was from Marshfield. Robert Cleaver, the bombardier in Crew 7, was from Portland, while Robert Emmons, the co-pilot of aircraft No. 8, was from Medford. Jacob DeShazer, the bombardier from Crew 16, who was captured and held prisoner by the Japanese, hailed from West Staten. Together, these men and 75 other volunteers helped to shape the course of the war 70 years ago, bringing a critical ray of hope to America during some of its darkest hours, foretelling the ultimate victory.